All right, so some great news for U.S. companies regarding the Corporate Transparency Act. So the Treasury Department just published this press release a few days ago on March 2nd. And in the notice, they have notified anybody who had to comply with this that they are not going to be enforcing any penalties for late filed returns or the failure to file the BOI report. So, a bit of background on this Corporate Transparency Act for those that are not familiar. The CTA was a new regulation that required certain U.S. domestic entities and some foreign entities to file a beneficial ownership information report, or BOI report for short, with FinCEN. Now, the report wasn't a tax document, it didn't include any financial information. All it was a report that had the name and address of the company, tax ID, and then information on beneficial owners. So that could be people that owned equity in the company or were otherwise some kind of controlling person. So an officer or a director or another high-level executive. And so there was a lot of frustration with this because it was litigated in the courts constantly throughout 2024. Eventually, the courts decided that the CTA was valid, it wasn't unconstitutional, and so they moved the deadline for a lot of taxpayers to file this to March 21, 2025, so only 2 weeks out from today. But now they're saying, look, we don't like the CTA. We're not going to be imposing any penalties if you fail to file. And so if we have a look at the notice here, we can see that the Treasury Department is announcing today with respect to the CTA that not only will it not enforce any penalties or fines associated with these BOI reports under the existing regulatory deadlines, but it will further not enforce any penalties or fines against U.S. citizens or domestic reporting companies or their beneficial owners after the forthcoming rule changes take effect either. The Treasury Department will further be issuing a proposed rulemaking that will narrow the scope of the rule to foreign reporting companies only. So what does that mean? If you're a domestic reporting company, so you're an entity that was set up in the U.S., there's not going to be any penalties imposed for failure to file these reports. They want to change the rules to just narrow it to a foreign reporting company only. So what's an example of that? Well, a foreign reporting company would be, let's say, a UK limited company. So you have a corporation set up in the UK, and then that entity registers to do business somewhere in the US. So let's say they want to open an office in Florida. They register to do business in Florida. That would likely make it a foreign reporting company. Now, realistically, that just never happens, right? It's very rare. And the reason for that is the UK company, instead of registering to do business in one of these states, it would set up a subsidiary. So you would have a UK company set up an LLC in Florida or Delaware, wherever, and it would own 100% of the LLC membership units, but it wouldn't itself register to do business. So that is really, really good news. So if we get a sense of what the penalties were going to be, they were quite steep. So the penalty for someone who willfully violates the reporting requirements could be subject to a civil penalty of up to $591 each day that the violation continues, as well as potential criminal penalties of up to 2 years in prison and a fine of 10 grand. So the penalties were very steep, right? I mean, they were a lot of individuals who filed these late because they just didn't know their company had to do it. Were certainly fearful they were going to get a massive bill in the mail from the Treasury Department. And now we can rest assured that that's just not going to happen. All right, so great news. So Scott Bessent quoted here saying this is a victory for common sense. I agree. I was never a big fan of the CTA. I thought it was ridiculous, but just my personal opinion. So today's action is part of President Trump's bold agenda to unleash American prosperity by reining in burdensome regulations, in particular for small businesses that are the backbone of the American economy. All right, so that covers it for this update. You know, for those of you that have yet to file, you can still file if you want, but according to this post by the Treasury Department, if you don't file, they're not going to be penalizing you. All right. I'll put a link in the description below for this notice if you want to go have a read yourself. There's a lot of other law firms and advisors that are writing about this. So good news for U.S. companies and U.S. citizens and any owner of one of these domestic businesses. All right. So that covers it. Thanks for watching. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on the next update.